Hey everybody, I appreciate y'all tuning in to this Zoom meeting where I talk a little bit about the fall transition as well as our Backwoods Adventures kayak bass experience that we're going to have down in the hill country in September. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what to expect as the bass kind of start to move shallow in the fall, and they kind of do their thing and then move back out deep. So without further ado, here we go. Thank y'all. So a little bit about me. I was originally born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And I grew up, for the most part, I grew up in Miami, Florida, where I really gained a love for kayak fishing. I started off, when I was growing up, I used to have a family friend that owned a kayak in Biscayne Bay, and she just kept it right there outside her house. And I used to beg my mom to call her up and ask for permission for me to get on it. And that's where my love for kayak fishing really took off. I mean, I caught my first snook out of that kayak. I caught one of my first tarpon out of that kayak and so many others. And then from then on, the rest was history. When I moved over here to Fort Worth, I joined the fishing team at TCU, and I wanted a way, I didn't have a boat here, of course, and I wanted a way to continue to hone my skills. And that's when I bought my first Diablo. And then from there, I decided, well, what better way to hone your skills than to enter a few tournaments? And I entered a few tournaments, and the very first tournament I entered was on Joe Pool Lake, and I ended up winning that tournament. And it was such a cool feeling. And from then on, I was kind of almost obsessive about entering kayak tournaments and trying to challenge myself against the best competition that I possibly could. And since then, I've won over 20 tournaments here in Texas, several Angler of the Year titles, and I now compete on a national scale. So let's get started talking a little bit about the fall transition. So the fall transition. A few things to keep in mind when you're approaching fall fishing is that the bait is really key. Whatever the bait is doing, the bass are following suit, and they're staying close to the bait, and they're never getting that far away from the bait. It's important to know where the bait is going in order to know where the bass are going. In some lakes, like some of our city lakes, the bait tends to stay shallow for most of the year, whereas on lakes like Lake Fork, the bait moves around a lot from deep to shallow and everywhere in between. Here in Texas, the main forage that we're going to follow around will be shad. So here, I tried to make I hope everybody can see my pointer, because I'm going to use this pointer to kind of show off a few areas here in Glade Creek, for example, that I would target from, just as an example. These you could show up to any of these spots and you might catch them or you really might not, but just as an example of what I look for on any lake, especially in the late summer and the early fall. So I start with main lake points. Here in this map, we have a key main lake point located in between two major arms, the Glade Creek arm and the Big Caney Creek arm. And here we have a point. It actually has a name. I believe it's called Hobbs Point. And that's what I mean by a main lake point. So it's a point that can easily be seen if you're looking at a map of the entire lake, and it usually stretches way into the water column. The next thing, before I get into the next thing, usually when you see points like this, it's important to use your electronics, because the bait could be literally anywhere in the water column. They could be all the way on the bottom in 25 feet of water, and they could be in 3 feet of water or 2 feet of water, or even as shallow as 6 inches. depending on, you know, your water clarity and your water temperature and whatnot. The next thing that I look for, especially as the fall progresses, is I look for secondary points. We have a secondary point here. We have a secondary point here. We have a couple of smaller secondary points elsewhere. Here, while this isn't exactly, it doesn't look real pointy, the fish might use that and identify it kind of as a point as they kind of move up. And those are key areas, especially as, you know, you get your first few fronts of the year. Your shad will move into those areas and your bass will follow suit. The next thing you want to look for, and I don't have a great example of this on this particular map, but is a channel swing, usually near the mouth of a creek. Now, later on in the summer, you can begin to look kind of further in the creek, but for right now, in the late summer and early fall, we're usually looking near the mouth of the creek. So in this particular case, I would consider the mouth of the creek this area, or in the Caney Creek arm, it would be this area. Key lures for the late summer, early fall, these are just, there's so many other things that you could be throwing, but these are just a few things that I like to keep in my quiver at that time of the year. Just a little bit of a tip. The shad are much bigger in the fall than they were back in the spring. So I tend to upsize my lures in the fall than I do, say, like during the shad spawn in the spring. I like 6 to 20 foot diving crankbaits. I like lipless crankbaits. I like spooks, pop bars, larger double willow spinner baits, etc. Once again, it's important when you're deciding what you're going to throw, it's important to kind of use your electronics to figure out exactly where in the water column the bait actually is. Now moving along into your regular fall season, where I identify the fall kind of like when the water temps are between 55 degrees and 75 degrees. So key areas, once again, secondary points. Those are going to be key areas throughout the entire fall season, and even going into the winter a little bit. Shallower channel swings, shallow flats, especially flats that have proximity to the main channel. Fish will move off of the main channel and just pound bait on the flats. I like rock and clay banks. Riprap is always a safe bet. So if you got riprap in the fall, fish it. Don't drive by it. Don't paddle by it. Fish it. I also wanted to show y'all some key areas. You know, I talk a lot about fish moving from deep to shallow, but not every lake has a lot of deep to shallow activity. And one example is Lake Worth. So I actually pulled up a map of Lake Worth, and I wanted to point out some key areas that I would target in this aerial. So for example, here we have a riprap wall, and the riprap wall happens to be on a point. That is, in the fall, is going to be super key. Fish are going to pin bait up against that riprap wall all throughout the fall. Another thing that I like to target are bulkhead banks. As you can see right here, there's some bulkheads. Anything that a fish can run bait into where the bait can't get away, it's going to be a really good ambush area for the bait. So I really like those bulkheads. So some key baits in the fall. I really like square bill crankbaits. My favorite one is the Excite Baits XB1. I love buzz baits and whopper ploppers. Honestly, I throw those all year round, except for maybe the winter. Pop bars, larger double willow spinner baits, and swim jigs. They can be bladed or unbladed. Some quick notes for fishing a little bit later in the fall or into the winter. If you're going to get on the water, make sure you're getting on the water to hunt ducks, because the fishing tends to get a little bit tough later on in the fall and in the early winter. There's any number of things the fish can be doing. However, it's important to note that late fall and winter time is a really good time to catch a larger fish. It's been proven in all kinds of studies that larger fish will feed more often in the winter time than smaller fish will. So if you're in an area that has a lot of smaller fish, that doesn't mean you're not going to catch smaller fish, but you may get more of those bigger bites than you would normally get at other times of the year. One of the things that I really like to target at that time of the year are suspended fish. The bait tends to suspend a lot at that time of year. They tend to ball up. So A-rigs, jerk baits can be really, really effective trying to catch those lower temperature schools of fish. Now, a little bit about the kayak bass experience that we're going to have here in September. I'm really excited about this. I got to spend some time on that body of water, and you should be too, especially if you get a chance to come out. That body of water was a lot of fun. I got to scout it out a couple of weeks ago. We caught tons of fish. We caught tons of fish on top water, and we caught tons of nice fish. So I'm really excited to get out there with y'all. Here you can see kind of in the background, I included a map of the lake that we're going to be fishing, and I wanted to tell you more or less what you can expect. You can expect to learn. I'm going to make myself available to everyone, and I'm going to work with everyone who's going to be on that trip. If there's anything that you want to work on or get better at, reach out to me, and I'm going to be prepared to help you get better at that. You can expect to be in top-of-the-line kayaks. We're not going to put you in anything cheap. You're going to be comfortable out there on the water, ready to catch all the fish you could want to fish. Expect some explosive topwater fishing. Late September is prime topwater time, and these fish love topwater bait, so I expect it to be absolutely stellar. Also expect great food, accommodations, and company. We're going to be staying in the nicest hotel in Hyco. So that's really exciting. We're going to have a steak dinner for y'all one of the nights. It's going to be great. What to bring? As far as conventional tackle, I would encourage everyone to bring between a 7.5 foot rod and medium heavy or heavy. I prefer that y'all bring some fluorocarbon or monofilament's fine, 15 to 20 pound. The water is pretty clear, so that fluorocarbon kind of helps in that clear water, and there's a lot of timber, and that fluorocarbon tends to be a little bit more abrasion resistant than your standard monofilament. If you decide to bring braid, I recommend between 40 and 65 pound tests. If you're bringing braid, I do recommend having a little spool of fluorocarbon to use as a leader. As far as lures, make sure you pack some buzz baits, some 110 to 130 size whopper ploppers. White or black is fine. Double willow spinner baits, bladed swim jigs, any brand doesn't really matter, white or black. I prefer the shad patterns at that time of the year. 10-inch worms, green pumpkin or plum, creature baits, and of course a square bill crankbait. It's hard to beat a square bill crankbait, and at this lake it'll be no exception. Other things I would encourage y'all to have that are pretty important are good polarized sunglasses. We have several here at Backwoods if you don't have a pair. Some technical fishing apparel that's UPF rated and lightweight to protect you from the sun. Some foul weather gear in case we run into some bad weather. We don't plan on being out on the water in inclement weather, but it's going to be good to have that gear in case, you know, we get a light drizzle or even a light rain. So long as there's no lightning, the fishing can be fantastic. Also bring some footwear that can get wet. Your feet are going to get wet. You're out there kayak fishing. Teva sandals or Sims wading shoes are going to work just fine. And we don't have anybody here for questions, but I would encourage you to shoot me a message on Facebook if you have any questions. I'm really excited to host this trip. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to working with all of y'all, and I'll see y'all over there. Thank you all for tuning in.